transform, yes. It's all about transformative learning, right?
Okay. Okay, friends. Welcome back after, I hope, a nice, cozy lunch, but not a snoozy lunch. At the outset, let me just forewarn you that I have been hoisted in this chair. So I'm sort of keeping the seat warm for the true person who was to come here and chair the session is stuck in the traffic jam. So we hopefully will be, inshallah, she'll be joining us in I think in another 5 or 10 minutes. And in the meanwhile, I'll initiate the the process of today's this panel discussion. I'm Vandana Mahajan. I am part of the Indian women's movement history still being made and unmade. So I've been there in these struggles, or where we have looked at issues of engaging with men also has become a very, very kind of crucial solidarity process of our strengthening and ongoing struggle for women's empowerment. So I'm very, very happy to be with this group, looking at, as the panel title suggests, that women's empowerment versus engaging men. Is it either or I'm sure now we are looking at breaking that whole binary of either or. And in today's panel, the focus is on looking at engaging with men, especially around issues of women's reproductive rights and her sexual autonomy. So in that space, we will be hearing from the 4 fellow colleagues on their experiments, their understanding, their innovations around engaging with with some very, very interesting models from the very brief kind of a rapid scan I did of the kind of work being done, and I'll leave the discussion open now, and I'll be, to cover up on my ignorance, I'll be asking each of you to please describe briefly and give an introduction. And I have been told, and I think you also have been told by Yasho, that about 12 to 13 minutes is, if each of you could restrict to that. So I'll begin with Erin. If you can give a brief introduction about yourself. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Erin Stern. I'm currently doing some consultant work for Safi Gender Justice based in Cape Town, South Africa, and I'll be presenting on some of my capacity work I've done with them today. I'm also an honorary research associate at the School of Public Health at the University of Cape Town.
Wonderful. Thanks, Erin. May I invite Thomas now?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Tom Churchard. I am the founding director of a mentoring project in Swaziland called Gwaka Invota, or Building a Man. I'm also the chairman of a Young Heroes, which is a food provision a program for orphans, double orphans in Swaziland, and a teacher. Thanks.
Great. Laura?
Hi, my name is Laura Pascoe, and I'm the Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights Program Specialist at Sonke Gender Justice based in Cape Town, and I'm also working on my PhD from the University of California, Davis. Thank you.
Great. And finally, Tyrone?
Thank you. I was prepared to say I concur, but not yet. My name is Tyrone McMyer. I come from Grenada, a very small island in the Caribbean. I think everybody I've spoken to here says the West Indies cricket team, so they recognize that. So I work with the Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic in Grenada, but regionally I'm the Vice Chairman of the Caribbean Male Action Network, which is what I'll be speaking about this afternoon.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. And now, I think without any further ado, may I ask Erin to begin with her presentation? Okay, sure. Would you like to take the podium? Sure. Yeah. And yeah, okay.
Great. Hi everyone. So myself and my colleague Laura, as I said, we're both at Stonky Gender Justice, and we're both actually presenting on similar projects. I'm only focusing on one context, but it gives quite a nice opportunity to use our 13 minutes in two different ways. So I'm going to be speaking about a project implemented by Reproductive Health Uganda in the Hoima district of Uganda, and just want to acknowledge that it was funded by RFSU Sweden and managed by Stonky Gender Justice. So just to kind of give some background to what I want to focus on of the project today and for our discussion. We've heard a lot about this in the plenary so far, and we're well aware that gender transformative approaches are there's much more evidence that they're likely to change men's SRH behaviors and attitudes, and we know that from the evidence, and that is, interventions that try to intervene at the level of norms and try to promote gender equality through the work. So SRH is one of the goals, but it's actually to promote more gender equality for all. There also is much evidence about the link between men's beliefs and patriarchal norms for SRH and their use of violence. So a strong investment at working at this level. However, what we've found in the field, and that this is a very difficult area to implement and also to evaluate. How do we actually measure gender transformative change? How do we know how sustainable this change is? And also how this level of gender transformative work, how does it actually empower and influence women's lives? And coming back to the theme of our talk today. And kind of looking at how part of the problems is that we still, in a way, in the field of insufficient both strategies and indicators. So strategies to implement this kind of work, but also indicators to measure and understand these processes of change. It's also been argued that there's even sometimes at the core just a lack of clarity on what the approach actually entails, or even what the concepts mean. So how gender transformative means something in a very particular context, and how it may not be culturally validated or relevant. So there's sometimes an issue that this language we use, it hasn't even been kind of culturally validated or confirmed. So these are kind of some of the things we wanted to explore, or that I'm going to be looking at of this project in Uganda. So this project did try to engage men in sexual reproductive health using this gender transformative framework and recognizing that it's a very critical area, especially in the realm of SRH, for being still such a precarious area for women and not wanting to promote men's involvement in this sphere to the potential of kind of recontrolling or making decisions over women's reproductive autonomy. So really wanting to make sure this was the grounding of this project. But to help kind of think about how to develop, implement, and also then coming back to evaluating it used the male involvement model, which was developed by Meg Green, who's also speaking here. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this model, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, is that this model looks at the importance of engaging men in 3 different levels, and that they're all very critical and they're all interrelate, but it's really important to look at them. They have different strategies for how to engage at these levels. And as we'll look at today, different strategies, I think, for even how to evaluate change at these 3 different levels. So the first one is engaging men as clients. This is around issues of, especially in the areas of SRH, actually accessing services. How can we cater to men's SRH needs? And we've seen a lot of the literature that attests to the need to, increase men's utilization and demand of SRH services. Equal partners is around the areas, again, as I said, of this really relates to the discussion we're having today, around making sure that men are supportive of their partners accessing SRH services, that men are, supportive of their partners in, reproductive autonomy, including accessing abortion, and also, contraceptive choice and equal decision making and communication. And at this level, looking at more of the gender transformative aspects. And advocates of change really refers to recognizing that in many societies men still hold a lot of political and cultural and social control, especially around both their own and women's SRH. And really trying to also recognizing the way that men can encourage other men to change, so that men's influence can be very powerful in society, so that if we can engage men to mobilize other men to be involved in being responsible for their own SRH and also accountable to women's SRH and society's SRH, that you're going to have more sustainable and widespread change. So this model is used as a basis to develop and implement, and then also think about how do we evaluate this project, which is called the Learning Center Initiative, and it's a project that was implemented in Uganda. And as I said earlier, it was funded by the Swedish Association for Sexuality Education and managed by Zambia Gender Justice. Another component of the project using a similar model was also done in Zambia, and Laura will talk about that more, but I'm just focusing on Uganda for today's talk. And so this is just a visual of this model, that they all interrelate and they're all critical, and it's not always clear. Sometimes something can be one of both, men and partners and men and clients, but they're all also, as I said, need to have different kind of strategies, different kind of motivations, and also different indicators to measure, as we'll look at. Just I always like to include maps. This is the district of Uganda, right on the border of the Congo, where this project was facilitated, and it was done for 3 years, 2011 to 2013. So I'm not going to talk too much about how the project actually implemented strategies at these 3 levels, because I want to really delve more into the findings today and what that means for evaluating change and change that also benefits women's reproductive health. But just to flag some of the key strategies that were used to really, the men as clients strategy, the LCI tried to increase the number of men that access SRH services, including STI testing and including HIV testing. So they had a few different strategies, including having male-only clinic days. A really nice thing about this project is that it has a strong partnership with the clinic in Quima, so it was able to actually work with the clinic and implement these kind of strategies, like having a male-only clinic day. And I think it's one of the kind of very positive, why we see such a positive benefit of this project. I'll come back to more, but having that structural support is really important. They offered voluntary medical male circumcision, offered STI testing and treatment to men, and they also, part of the project was to train 120 peer educators that they used to both promote SRH awareness among men, holding focus groups and discussions, and also to address misunderstandings of SRH that they found were held in the community. At the level of men as equal partners, the project, some of the things they did, and again, these are just some of the strategies that were used, was holding workshops, both with men separately, but also with men and women together. We've heard a lot of talking this week about, how it's actually critical that men and women share their experiences together to try to challenge certain unequal gender roles, look at areas of gender-based violence, and encourage equal communication and sexual decision-making around contraception. Also looking at gender roles, a big area that came up, related to the care work and domestic care work, was very clearly divided in the communities there. It's something that was also tried to address at this level. And another part of this level was having income-generating projects, both for the men and women. And this came up that sometimes men were, part of this men as equal partners is to also encourage men to support their women accessing SRH services and accessing clinics, and having their reproductive health insured. But there was some kind of discussion how sometimes just lacking income to go to clinics or to care for their partners and families was a barrier. And this was also found to be a motivator to be involved in the project, but it was something that very small kind of scale income generating projects also accompanied this strategy. And at the level of men as advocates of change, there were different strategies as well, one of them being just inviting men to share personal testimonies about their involvement in the project, or about, as I said, trying to mobilize others about their involvement in this area of SRHR. And they used things like radio discussions, they had community groups, used different platforms that were very powerful in the community, such as churches. And they also engaged community-led leaders, including religious and traditional leaders, and tried to get their support on board, which they found was really important for this particular level. So then, just to give a quick overview of the methods, it's important to note that there was a survey conducted in 2012. So as I said, it was a 3-year project from 2011 to 2013. And there was a survey with 164 married men aged 18 to 54. This is really the target group of the LCI. To really just get an assessment of the men's SRH and gender attitudes, and they were randomly selected. So some men would have been actual project beneficiaries of the LCI, the Learning Center Initiative. Some men wouldn't have been, but it was just to give a kind of broad kind of baseline of certain gendered attitudes and SRH, both attitudes and knowledge in the area. But what I'm going to focus on today, because I think it speaks to the kind of area I'm trying to address, is the evaluative research, which was collected in 2014. This included 5 focus groups, which consisted of about 10 to 12 people each, with both peer educators who were involved in the project, some of the male beneficiaries of the project, and also some of their partners, and getting their perspective on the project. And also using 4 interviews with project staff and the male client. So this was done after the project and was really trying to just assess how did this project influence them at these 3 levels of the male involvement model, and try to really unpack that more. So that's why I'll focus on that with my discussion today. So just in terms of some of the findings that, as I said, came out from this qualitative data, to kind of support thinking through this model and what it means for evaluating this working at this model. At the level of men and clients, there was a very steady increase in the number of men accessing SRH services, so they really did find positive, and kind of the kind of indicators were very clear that they had met some of the kind of objectives they hoped to at this level. They estimated that about approximately 4 times as many men started accessing SRH services over the 3 years. And because they were, as I said, tied to this clinic, they were actually able to kind of monitor and track that change, which is a really positive, I think, component of this project. They found that through the focus groups and interviews, it came out that things like the community outreaches, so sometimes taking services to the communities, to the workplaces, that's another strategy that was very useful at engaging men as clients. Having the male-only clinic days was particularly useful because there was some discussion of the kind of stigma around accessing these services, and some of the negative kind of attitudes from service providers, so that was found to be effective. And also the medical male circumcision was found to be particularly, effective as well. As I said, I think this partnership with the clinic really allowed not only to have things like the male-only clinic days, but also to train staff and work with staff around understanding their experiences of working with men. So it really provided a good way to also not ensure more services, but to ensure more quality services as well. Okay, I've been told I have 1 minute, so I'm going to skip through the quotes, just so I can get to the men as equal partners part, because this is really more relevant to what we're talking about today. So the couples counseling and testing that was promoted as part of this project was found to be very valuable tool for promoting open communication and equal decision-making within relationships. And there was also, self-reports, and I will talk a bit about some of the limitations of that, but there were self-reports both on behalf of the female partners and the male beneficiaries themselves, that there was increased willingness to do domestic chores. And this was found to be linked, as well as the open communication, equal decision-making. Of course, they all intersect on decreased tolerance of violence and also improved relationship quality, including sexual satisfaction, kind of supporting what Michael Kimmel was talking about yesterday with care work. The income-generating activities were found to really support men to both care for their own SRH, but also support their partners accessing them, which is something that came out of this is something that was actually asked for from the community. What's interesting is some wives were quite resistant, both men and women talked about that, to transforming these roles, both for kind of threatening their partner's status, but for their own status as well. And I think it just really speaks to the importance of ensuring that women are involved in this kind of work and making sure this is gender synchronized programs, and also evaluating it from their perspective, because there may be a kind of inherent idea that this is something that women would appreciate, and it was something that came out that it wasn't always the case. So that's just some of the clinic kind of signs I had up around promoting men as equal partners. And just the last one, the men as advocates of change. There was some discussion around how the personal testimonies were really powerful for just supporting that, different kind of undermining this homogeny of masculinities and looking at different men's real life stories and how they engage with certain pressures and how they also, could also change in small ways in their lives, and how this is a really effective tool for working at this level. While some men did talk about mobilizing other men to be involved in this area, this was definitely the kind of least notable and also just measurable change. We don't really have enough data to speak to how do we engage men at this level, and I think it just really speaks to the fact that it's a difficult thing to measure, and that's kind of been discussed even by Meg Green herself, who developed the model. That this is really the most difficult, not only to implement, but also to understand this process of change at this level. I think it also probably relates to the difficulty of, outwardly challenging very rigid gender and cultural norms. It may be a different thing living these things out on an internal or a family basis, but to actually outwardly mobilize and challenge them is a different kind of commitment, and probably takes different levels of time and effort to occur. Okay. Well, we'll discuss it more in the discussion part. Thanks. Laura can also fill in a bit.
Thank you, Anna. I'm sorry for asking you, but that's the challenge. We'll get a chair, and I'll just, what I'll do is, Sarojini, who is the original natural occupant of this chair, as a right, and Sarojini has been in the area of working on issues of from the gender justice perspective on women's health for a very long time. So I'm very happy to hand over the chair to you. Erin, I think just to sort of fill in Sarojini about Erin, as she very interestingly, in a kind of a rainbow approach, talked about this project in Uganda from Sonke on engaging, on working with men, but in that the three-tiered approach of having men responding to men's own issues on sexual and reproductive health, in giving kind of a very exclusive time and space to their issues, along with treating as an approach the couple counseling, and then also creating time for the men to look at issues of other issues of gender-based violence and intimate partner relationship. So on those three axes the project has been working, and I think that it's still work in progress. So I hand over to Sarojini, and I'll request now Thomas.
Before Thomas starts, my apologies for coming a little late because I'm still working on a statement which is, I'm sure some of you must have read in the newspapers that there were 11 deaths which happened in a scam where the female sterilizations are happening in one of the states in northern India. So we are trying to send a press release as soon as possible today. Like it is a callousness and then the negligence. When we talk about gender justice and women's rights and reproductive rights, it is an important issue which we need to address, and then we feel very anguished with the kind of death which happened because of the negligence. And even the women who are there, the rest of the women are not in a good condition. So there is going to be a fact finding, and then we are issuing the statement today. So that's why I got delayed, and then there was massive traffic jam. But my apologies for the delay. Yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Tom Churchard. I am, as I said, the founding director of GWACA in Vossa. And I'd just like to start by thanking Men Engage for allowing me to speak today, because... Are we on? Hello? There we go. Try again. Now we're on. I'd like to thank Men Engage for allowing me to speak, because I think it's a real testament to this symposium that a small 2-year-old organisation like ours is asked to share their ideas on this platform. So we are, as I said, GWACA in Vossa, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the concept of the third space, not so much in the activities that we do in our mentoring, but in the space we try and provide. We've heard a lot about space in the last few days, and it's quite an abstract notion, and it can be used as quite a filler word to fill a vacuum or a hole a lot of the time. So I hope I can sort of explain a little bit about the space we try and create, and the tenets of that space and how it can be recreated. And this is an abstract from some research that myself and a lady called Kim Kotel have been doing through Gwaka Involta in Swaziland. So to begin, a bit of history on Gwaka, and then I'll talk about the space. Gwaka Involta means building a man in Siswati, and it was conceived a couple of years ago in response to what we saw as a silent crisis happening in Swaziland. And that crisis is the combination of huge gender disparity and inequality and an untold HIV/AIDS epidemic that's happening in the country. So as such, we, and for reasons we'll talk about in a second, have developed a mentoring program working with young boys, and we now have 85 young boys in 2 communities of rural Swaziland, so we're still quite small but ever growing, and all of our cadets, our Emajaha, our young boys are aged 15 to 25, and they all grow up in a domestic sphere without a positive male role model. And so usually because of their father has passed on, or because they haven't got a positive uncle or other role model in the house. So we're, just to tie it in, we're a steering committee member of Men Engage Swaziland, and currently the only male youth focus group in Swaziland. And there we are. I'll talk a bit more about the project in a second, but we focus on essentially with communication with our beneficiaries and the communities in which we work. We've identified 3 things that we think are very important for a young man's development, particularly a young man's development when there is no positive male role model from which they can garner these things in other ways. And those are financial independence from the family and being able to contribute to the family, male health, male-focused health. As Laura was saying earlier, the statistics are quite of male health uptake or service uptake, and particularly HIV knowledge of HIV positive men is very small. And then lastly, a concept of male responsibility, which is a bit abstract, but it's very important in what we do. And in that regard, we do things like work experience programs, skills building, interview skills, careers guidance and things with our boys. We do SRH models, but also drink and drugs workshops, which are very, very focused on a male audience. And then lastly, responsibility. So things like responsibility to yourself and to women, but also responsibility to the community and the environment as well. So to give you a little bit of context about Swaziland, as many of you might not quite know exactly where we are, we're a very, very small country of 1.2 million people, and we reside in southern Africa, as you can see on my very accurate map of the world here. This map of the world is actually, as you can see, in no way accurate. It is accurate based on HIV prevalence rates across the world. And you can see the huge distortion in the African continent here, but also the more localized in the southern African continent, which makes Swaziland a country that you can drive across in 2 hours or 2.5 hours with 1.2 billion people, roughly the size of some of Central America, all of Central America in fact, and you can see it there. And so as a country we have, to build on that, an incredibly high prevalence of HIV and TB because of the co-infection rate, which makes us the highest prevalence rate in the world, 26% of the total population. But this is actually a bit of a misnomer as a statistic, because the total population includes obviously a lot of sexually inactive people as well, and as such the sexually active demographic can read much, much higher than that, giving us a life expectancy of 49 years, very short life expectancy, and 58% of the population being under 25, which creates a youth demographic and the potential for change, but also a burden on the society in many ways as well. If we look at these two graphs here very quickly, this is the one I want to focus on. As I say, in that demographic, between 35 and 39 years of age, men are 48% likely to have HIV, or be living with HIV, so 1 in 2. And this is very important because, of course, it's the fatherhood age. It's the age where men have adolescent children. And so this is a small quote from one of our participants in our project, and it reads, "Some men drink all their salaries and expose their lives to HIV, which means they're not taking care of their lives and those of their families. Bad man, he drinks a lot, goes away a lot, and comes home without money, but expects a wife to dish for him, even when he does not buy the food." And so this is the kind of image of masculinity that a lot of our boys are exposed to, if they're exposed to one at all, because of that fatherhood demographic. Coupled with that, as I say, the traditional patriarchy in the country means that men make all the decisions in nearly every sphere, with the exception of the very vital role that women play in the domestic sphere in the raising of children and unpaid care work. Men particularly make all the decisions other than that. And gender-based violence, as I've said, is sky high. Inequality remains a silent crisis. Corporal punishment in schools leads to a threatening environment in schools, and in a recent study by Save the Children, well, not so recent anymore, but a very, very prominent study by Save the Children, they over 2,000 children were interviewed, and along the lines of 59% suggested that they'd been beaten by an object at school in the last 2 weeks, and another 19% by hand at the same schools, so meaning that 80% of people had been beaten in the last couple of weeks. School is a place where you learn patience, because you can get beaten for nothing, says Pius. So where's fatherhood in this environment, and what do we want to do with it? I'm going to skip a little bit of this because I have little time, but only 22% of households have both a present mother and a father, and this becomes a huge problem in presenting role models for this burgeoning young generation, as I've spoken about before. And 45% are classified as orphaned or vulnerable. WACA in Wodza, as a response to that, tries to create a space which is away from the home and the school environment, and which can create and foster positive role models for these boys and young adults away from those two often negative spaces. The third space itself, for me and for many of you, I think is a space that is very necessary in our lives and our psychological development. For me, as an Englishman, it was always a bar or a cafe, but it varies from culture to culture. But what we find in sub-Saharan and particularly rural Africa is those third spaces don't exist. Those spaces where we can just be ourselves don't exist. And so what we try and do at GWACA is present that space through a regular mentoring activity. And this space has some ideas that I would like to share with you now in the last few minutes. And those tenets are as follows. It needs to be created by people and not places. A space doesn't matter, it doesn't really matter where it is, as long as the people who fill it are positive and regular. It needs to be disassociated from the home and the school or the workplace. It needs to be male orientated in our case. It needs to be safe and free from threat, be regular, reliable and carefully constructed, promote independent, consequential-based decision making, be free from doctrine, religious, social or otherwise, create a sense of ownership, achievement and responsibility, and challenge patriarchal stereotypes. And encourage ideologies of respect, dignity and honour, and the individual interpretation thereof. So I'm not going to go through all of those because I think some of them are apparent, and I can share a paper with you at the end. But a closer look at a couple of them suggests that, as I say, people, not places, are the important thing. Be free and safe from threat, obviously. I think no adolescent grows up and develops psychologically into a well-balanced human being in a threatened environment. Promote independent, consequential decision-making, and maybe we can talk about that in a second. A sense of ownership and those ideologies. And so, as I say, I'm going to skip the quotes in the same way that the previous speaker did. But as you can see, the results that we have had at GWACA are from this third space are very appealing and very encouraging in that it can be replicated very easily using these tenets. And I'm going to focus on just one of these quotations to finish. The mentors are good people. They have been so good to me ever since I started working with them. They're so humble and down to earth. They're always giving us the space to feel at home whenever we're with them. They give us love, respect, and honour. Said by David, obviously a pseudonym. And so, in conclusion, the results of this rather long research paper that we've been compiling over the last 6 months, based on the effects of this space, this creation of this space, is as follows. The third space, and particularly the positive third space that we employ, having taken them from sociological and psychological theory, can have a dramatic effect on the engagement and sustainable behaviour change of young Swazi men in this environment. But also, more research needs to be done on whether it can be replicated in other contexts and other environments, so that we can bridge this difficult engagement issue with young men elsewhere, and it can have coupled with a structured curriculum such as the one that we run at GWACA and WOTSA, it can have a particularly strong effect on social change, but we don't know the entire effect yet, so more research is needed on the creation of this space and how we can use it in these kind of programs. And so, just on the buzzer, I'm going to finish. If you want to know more about the project, please feel free to talk to me afterwards. I can share the paper with you, the leaflets that we've got here as well. I've also got a small article in the Voice magazine that was in your packs as well, which you can read. But thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tom. And now I invite Tyrone Walter Buckman from or Laura. Laura Pasco. She is going to speak, like her presentation is together but on whose terms, understanding women's reproductive autonomy in the context of gender transformative sexual and reproductive health programming in Zambia and Uganda. You have 15 minutes, Laura.
Ooh, I'm going to have to bring this down a little bit because I'm much shorter. I have to say, as a geographer, I'm really excited to hear people talking about space in these concrete ways, so thank you for that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Pasco, and as I said before, I work at Sonke Gender Justice in Cape Town. Just very quickly, I'm going to give a quick background on the project and the research that I'm speaking about, the findings and the analysis and conclusion, pretty straight up. I just want to caveat with the conversation that I want to have today is less about the nitty-gritty of what the data shows and how, or what the, how strong the data is. The data is sometimes a little bit shoddy, but it's more about the conversation I want to start here, so I hope you'll bear with me while I kind of breeze through some of those parts so we can get into the juicy bits. So Aaron already spoke about this, but I just thought I should include it in the slide. I'm speaking about a research that was undertaken as part of the Learning Center Initiative, which is a project that Sonke Gender Justice managed, and then Reproductive Health Uganda and Planned Parenthood Association of Zambia implemented during 2011 to 2013. If you don't know who Sonke is at this point, you probably have been walking around with your eyes closed, so I won't. I'm afraid Sonke is here a lot, which is fantastic, but I won't say this. But just so you know, that's Sonke. And again, with the maps, and apologies, these maps are not great, but just to give you a rough sense of where the districts are that we're speaking about in Uganda and Zambia for this project. So the actual research basically kind of came in as sort of a piece of realizing, we've got this little bit of money and we'd really like to do some research partway through this 3-year project around what men are thinking about and talking about and understanding within these areas. It's important to note that the men that we spoke to some of them were part of that had been sort of seen by the project or involved with it, and some hadn't, but they were in this district. So the degree to which the research is a reflection of how much this project has impacted them is certainly not very substantive here. And yeah, overall it was 304 participants across Zambia and Uganda. And I should also say that the survey that we used was adapted by none other than the amazing Jamil from IPPF here. So thank you very much for that survey. It was very useful via Tim Shand. So just to give you a snapshot of sexual and reproductive health and rights, but really contraceptive use and abortion in Uganda and Zambia, just to set the stage, is that, currently, and this was based on, I think, 2011 DHS data, women between the ages of 15 to 49 years who are married or cohabiting with their partners, contraceptive use is only less than a quarter in Uganda and 41% in Zambia. So quite a big difference, but still probably not as much as we'd ideally like, given that the unmet need, I didn't have stats, I wasn't able to find them for Zambia, but in Uganda the unmet need is 1 in 3 for women, which is amongst the highest in sub-Saharan Africa. And that the research does show that both in Uganda and Zambia, men's opposition or the partner's disapproval of contraceptive was a big inhibiting factor of women being able to access the contraceptives. And in terms of abortion, because it's a big piece in terms of reproductive autonomy I'm going to speak about today, is that it's important to recognize that the current abortion laws in sub-Saharan Africa are still often very copy and paste from their colonial legacy. So, for example, if you look at the Zambian Termination of Pregnancy Act of 1972, it literally is kind of a copy and paste of the UK Abortion Act, and one of the pieces of that that's important to note is the UK Act requires a woman to have 3 different doctors' referrals, and that's copied and pasted into the Zambian context, where women are lucky to see one doctor potentially in her whole life course. And so the reality of what that looks like in that context wasn't taken into consideration, and so how that plays out for women in Zambia is very, very different and quite problematic. And that generally, if you think about where abortion is located in laws, it's generally located in the penal code or in the kind of, this is when it's not allowed, rather than this is a right and this is how we're going to ensure that women have access to it. So just in terms of the framing. And again, why abortion is an important piece to talk about is, as many of us here know, roughly half of all pregnancies across the world are unintended. 16 women die daily from unsafe abortion, and 1 in 8 maternal deaths are the cause of unsafe abortion globally. So in this research that we did across these men, ages 18 to 64 across Zambia and Uganda, what we did see was that the participants' knowledge of contraceptive methods was quite high. So in Zambia, we asked them to tell us which of the methods they were most familiar with and which ones they knew, that they knew, and the second most mentioned in Zambia was the female condom, which is quite exciting. Whereas in Uganda, the female condom was the 8th most mentioned, so not as much. And then in Zambia, knowledge of the IUD or the loop was least mentioned, whereas in Uganda it was 4th mentioned, just to give you a snapshot of what that looked like. Interestingly to note, and this has been the conversation happening a lot at this conference, which I'm really excited to see, is that what we saw on this was that knowledge around male sterilization or vasectomy was extremely low, and that this could be a really good opportunity to engage men. But that 2/3 of the respondents in both Zambia and Uganda did report using at least one contraceptive method regularly, which is at least exciting. So this is a snapshot of showing men's attitudes on women's roles in contraceptive decision making. So just to give you a sense, so generally Uganda. So these are what men disagreed with, and so you'll notice that that in Uganda it's sort of slightly more promising with some of these than in Zambia, but that you see that you're looking at sort of half or less than half are saying, I disagree that women who use contraceptives may become promiscuous or that it's a woman's responsibility to get pregnant, which is pretty promising. It's pretty exciting that we're seeing a lot of men saying, like, no, I don't believe in these norms that people are telling me that I should believe in. And then when you look at men's attitudes on joint decision-making, you see quite high numbers. So you see that men believe that a man and a woman should decide together what kind of contraceptive to use, and that men believe that a couple should decide together if they want to have children. And again, we don't know how much of this is the impact of the project, but just a snapshot of the people there. And what I would say looking at this is that's potentially really exciting, right? We've got men who realize they want to be involved with this and they want to have a say in that, and that's really exciting. However, if you start to look at this in the context of men's attitudes on contraceptive use versus abortion, you start to see where some of these pieces are a little bit more problematic. So whereas in Zambia, a man 50% disagreed that contraception is a woman's business, and disagreed by 36% that it's a woman's responsibility to avoid getting pregnant, when asked if a woman has a pregnancy and she does not want it, what should she do? Over half said, continue the full term, she shouldn't get an abortion. And you'll see the numbers even more stark in Uganda. So for me, this really struck me as realizing, men's attitudes when you look at women's right to decide what they want to do with their own bodies, and again, this is not just in Zambia and Uganda, this is in many places, men still generally want to have control over women's reproductive autonomy. When asked for these men when abortion was justified, this is a piece that I found really, really interesting. And if you look at this, what you'll see is that when men believe that abortion was justified is far greater. It's still quite low. None of these are over half of the population. But what you'll see is that when it's justified is times when it's not within a woman's control. So when her health is endangered or when there's a serious issue with the baby, those are the issues that it's like, okay, well maybe that could be acceptable. When it starts to be something about a woman's true decision, that she doesn't want a child, that it was a contraceptive failure, that she doesn't feel like she can afford it, that's unacceptable. That's far less likely for people to say, yeah, absolutely, she should be able to make that decision as she chooses. And so for me, looking at this data, what I found really interesting, and I should have said this at the start, but I'll say it now, I bring this research and these questions as a very strong believer of engaging men and boys in gender equality. It's a field that I love, and I love being in spaces with everyone here. So I raise these questions within that context. And so for me, what I found with this was, men are learning and they do want to support women, and that's really, really exciting. We're seeing men who want to understand about contraception. Some of them know quite a bit about it. And they do want to support women in saying, no, just because they're using contraceptives doesn't mean that a woman's promiscuous, and I'm okay with saying that. And I think that that's really promising. I think it's also promising that men want to be actively involved. They want to have a say in how many kids they have with their partner. And they want to have a say with their partner in relation to contraceptive use. But if you look at both of those, without some of this data around the abortion, you maybe might miss out on some of those more nuanced power issues that are playing out there. And so for me, the data around the abortion question really pulled out, if men are still so hesitant around women's right to choose for abortion in their own context, then what we're looking at is that it's more of a, okay, these rights are okay and these rights are okay, but it's not, these are your rights. And that's just the end of the story. And so we really need to think through, the fact that far too many men are not at the moment supportive of women's right to choose. And I do acknowledge that obviously there's many women in these contexts, and there's many other reasons why attitudes around abortion are pretty severe. But to recognize that big gatekeepers and people who can lead this conversation in some really constructive ways, along with women, are the men that we need to involve in this. So in conclusion, for me, looking at this as work, and again, in collaboration with Erin and other colleagues, it's critical to continue to involve men in the male involvement model, which is what this project did and what a lot of all of our work, I think, does. And we need to involve men as clients in their own right, as well as, learning about contraception and other things. And we need to involve men as equal partners, and we need to involve men as advocates of positive change, and we need to do that all together so that they reinforce each other. And that those approaches must be gender transformative, as we've all seen and we all know, but that it's really important that women's reproductive autonomy within that is not given as piecemeal, but that it is a given, and that we need to figure out how we nuance some of the conversation around bringing men into the conversation and bringing men involved, which is a fantastic piece of this work, in a way that's not leaving us with, well, yes, I support her, but only in these 8 ways, and those 2 ways I can't. And then again, and I was in the gender synchronization panel before lunch that Meg Green and Andrew Levesque with the gender synchronization model, and so I would just highlight again that we need to recognize men and women as relational within these pieces. Men need to speak out for the decriminalization of abortion. That needs to happen now across every country. And we need to put the right to choose to access abortion back in the hands of women, and that's going to be one of the biggest measurements that we can see of men truly respecting and understanding women's reproductive autonomy and the ability for women to make decisions that work for them. And then beyond this, we need to continue to reach beyond just individual men, but we need to continue to question where those individual men are and women in the broader structure. So again, if we look at how these abortion laws are put into play, we can see the way that patriarchy and colonial legacies and these other pieces have informed them, and we need to challenge those pieces too. It's not enough to just tweak here or to change some men over here. We've got to think systematically and thoughtfully around those structures as well. And I will just re-quote Rahul Bose from the inaugural session, because I thought that what he said was really powerful in this, so I'll just say that quickly, which is that engaging men in gender equality is not about letting women do what they choose or giving women the rights they deserve, but about understanding that women will take the decisions they choose that is right for them because it is their right. And that is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I will invite Tyrone Walter Buckmeyer, who is from Caribbean Male Action Network. He is going to speak on engaging men to promote gender and social justice.
Oh, it's a nice thank you. I could use it.
Sure. Where is yours?
I don't know. I don't do it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So the Caribbean Male Action Network is a regional network that operates in the Insular Caribbean region. We have currently our head offices in Trinidad and Tobago, but we are working with partners and affiliates in 12 countries around the region to do a host of programs that seek to promote gender and social justice. But what is the reality of the Caribbean father today? What are some of the realities? What are some of the driving forces for our work? What have we learned over the years since 2006, when CARIMAN was originally created, to now that continues to inform what we do? I just want to give you some of the, what you might consider some of the characteristics, if you will, or the realities of Caribbean men, Caribbean fathers. One of the unfortunate realities is that Caribbean fathers, by and large, or many Caribbean fathers, are serial childbearers or serial fathers. They have multiple children, multiple communities with multiple women, some of them in multiple countries. That has implications for how their children are brought up, how they provide for their children, and it has implications for the work that we as an organization, regionally, and local organizations such as Planned Parenthood associations, etc., can work and program with fathers. There's a high level of absentee fathers in our region. In many countries in the region, there's more than 50% of households today are single female-headed households. In Grenada, where I come from, it's 54% of all households are single female-headed households. So that speaks to the absentee characteristic of a lot of Caribbean fathers, and again, really cries out for intervention. There's a very high sense of entitlement among many of our Caribbean men, and this is driven by, on the one hand, our culture, especially our culture as promoted through some of the music of the region. And the Caribbean is an area that is considered to have invented three musical forms, art forms, calypso, reggae, and soca. And in all of these forms, in its more recent, the more recent representations of these forms of music speak very highly to the rights of men and the entitlements of men and the objectification of women. There's deep-rooted patriarchy that goes back, of course, to historical times, and it is a challenge that we in the region face as so many other areas of the world. Unfortunately, we also have very high levels of sexual violence. In recent studies internationally, the Caribbean is considered to be third in the 10 countries in the world with the highest prevalence of sexual violence. The Caribbean rates in that. So these are not proud statistics or proud characteristics that I share with you. It is just the reality that informs the work that we must do. There are very high rates of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. One of the things that challenges the work across all sectors almost is the fear, or at least the reluctance on the part of Caribbean men to access sexual and reproductive health services. and then there's an ignorance of legal processes, especially at the knowledge of how the law can work for men in areas of child custody, visitation, and financial support. And finally, a reluctance, largely on the part of men, to use condoms, both for the prevention of pregnancies and for the prevention of transmission of sexually transmitted infections. So in this sort of grave reality, the Caribbean Male Action Network is attempting to work with men and men's organizations and women's organizations and service providers to encourage men to take a more proactive, holistic approach to their fatherhood responsibilities, their responsibilities of men, fatherhood and mentoring responsibilities, even in the context where they may not yet have fathered children. So we work with both men and boys. And I will just talk very quickly in the next few minutes about some of the programs that we have created as CAIMAN specifically, or informed and worked with other partners to create and implement in the region that seeks to address some of these problems and characteristics. One such is called the Man Talk, or it's a series of the Man Talk series. This book is called Caribbean Man Talking About Manhood, Caribbean Men Talking About Manhood, which is has been in production since 2006. And what this booklet seeks to do is to engage men at various levels across the region, men and boys, in conversations about manhood, in conversations about what it is to be man, a man as opposed to just being male, because in the Caribbean there's a phenomenon that many fruit trees do not produce fruit in season. And when we have asked men, in groups and gatherings, you ask men, so when a fruit tree doesn't produce fruit, it's called a male tree, right? And when we ask Caribbean men, so if it's a male tree, what do you do with it? And they very proudly say, well, you cut it down, which suggests that just to be male is not enough. And so the work of our network is to really help Caribbean men to understand their responsibilities as men, to understand the concept of manhood, not in isolation, or not just as a way of promoting manhood over womanhood, but to understand that as human beings we have these characteristics that inform who we are and how we behave, but at the same time we can learn behaviors that are different, that are more positive and more uplifting. One of the programs that we have been involved in for many years, and I see there's a similar one in the presentation from Laura and Erin, is a program that is called Champions for Change. This is particularly an initiative around gender-based violence, which is very prevalent in our region. The Champions for Change initiative is about working with men and women to advocate amongst their peers for reduction and hopefully eventually elimination in gender-based violence, particularly because, as I said, that is a major problem that we have in the region. And Champions for Change was created by CAIMAN, working along with the UN Women system, UN Women, and it is one of the programs that we've seen a lot of success with, because what we've recognized over the years that we've been working is that there are many men. I mean, I mentioned the negative characteristics, which was not to paint a picture that we're all bad down there, but to say that there are also a lot of men who want to break out of that mold, who want to work in a much more positive and uplifting way. And the Champions for Change is one of the vehicles we use to engage these men, boys and women, in the work. More recently, we created a series of videos called Bull in a Pen, which is an expression that comes from Jamaica. But really what it is about is the series of videos engages young men in conversations about issues of youth and issues of adults as you grow up. So it looks at issues of,
This is the one.
yes, the Bull in a Pen. Sorry, yes, the Bull in a Pen series. We do not have many of these, but all of these materials that I'm mentioning, all of these resources are available on our CAIMAN website. But we do have a brochure that you can get copies of that has most of the information in it. So the Bull in a Pen series talks about these perceptions of domination and sexuality and all of that in a way that is understood by young people, but it doesn't just end at the video. It engages in conversation. So this is a very good resource to use with groups, focus groups, and young people groups, that these questions that are raised at the end of the series. One of the things we've more recently gotten involved with is Kaiman. We've been contracted by an organization in the region to actually work with military organizations. We recently completed workshops with the Suriname Defense Organization and the Jamaica Defense Force, and we're contracted to continue this work to help within the military context, among the military population. We're now creating a series of peer education programs that encourage peer educators within the military to work with their peers to reduce the incidence of STIs and unplanned pregnancies among the military population. One of the reasons for the serial fatherhood in the region and the absentee fathers is that military organizations ship their personnel around. And it is often the case where, whether it's in the police or the defense forces, as officers are stationed in different states or counties or locations, they begin relationships, they father children, and then a few months later, they move on to other locations. So we see this as a very important entry point for work with the uniformed populations of the region. In many of our countries, Kaiman supports workshops, men health workshops, where we encourage men to find out, to access services that have to do with their physical and mental health, because as I mentioned earlier, as one of the characteristics, one of the challenges is that by and large men do not access these services unless they reach the point of crisis sickness, where they're so sick that they cannot help but go to a doctor because now they're afraid of dying. But other than that, men choose to self-diagnose and self-medicate. And Kaiman is attempting to change that. Another program that we're very, very involved with regionally is called the Partnership for Peace Initiative. This is a program that is actually designed to work with batterers, male batterers who have been brought before the court, and the court will then refer them to these programs that we're now currently involved in 7 countries in the region. And that program was originally supported by the UN Women when it was UNIFEM in the region, and now continues. These men are sent into the program. It runs for 16 weeks in our context, and at the end of those 16 weeks, reports are given to the court, and the court makes decisions based on their level of involvement in the program. In addition to these ones that I've mentioned, we're now entering the work of fatherhood and caregiving. We are, having become the regional coordinator for Men Engaged in the last few years, we're also attempting, with support from Men Engaged and Promundo, to adopt some of these their international programs for use in the regional space. We continue to do generalized education for men around all of these issues, men and boys, because we believe that at the end of the day, for us to be effective in changing the norms, changing the perceptions, and promoting social justice and gender equality, the question that is asked to guide this panel, empowering women or engaging men, is it an either or? It cannot be an either or. We have to work together. It has to be an approach that is all-encompassing, because when all is said and done, communities and regions where organizations work together in a holistic way to promote these kinds of programs benefit not only the men, they don't only benefit the women, they benefit families in our region, and hopefully at the end of the day, our communities and countries are better as a result of these interventions. If there are any questions, as I said, we do have copies of our Kaiman brochure. I have about 20 of them in the room with me, and we have a booth that we share with North American Men Engaged Network, booth number 6. You can feel free to pass by and grab some brochures or ask any questions, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all the speakers. I mean, we heard from Uganda, and from Caribbean, and from Swahili, Swaziland. I think it's an important information which we all have, anyway, heard from the speakers. And if there are any questions, if you can address them, like we can try one round, 4 questions, and then come back to that. We still have 20 minutes time for the discussion, so we can use it quite productively. So we'll take 4 at the time and then come back. If you can introduce your name and from where you come from, that will be very useful.
Hi, my name is Myra Betson. I work for Chicago. We do a lot of health system strengthening and capacity building of health providers. My question is, I guess, for Erin, and probably Laura can respond as well, about the male-only health clinic days. I'm just wondering how you were able to sort of do that and convince, I guess, the system to designate just male-only health clinic days and the gender advisory for our Global Maternal Child Survivor Program. And I'm trying to figure out how I would convince the obstetricians and midwives that are really trying to promote basic emergency obstetric care and skills birth attendance for women to designate certain days just for men.
Thank you very much. My name is James. I'm from Namibia, representing MenEngage Namibia. The question I have, in a few comments, is really around the whole discussion around, male involvement and women's empowerment. I was in the presentation before that spoke about gender organization, and a question that I had, or an impression that I had, is that a lot of the work around women's empowerment is really focused around the economic empowerment of women, and there's a missing link for me around the transformative work with women, because in my country, for instance, you can do empowerment programs. Women can be empowered, but when they step back into their household, they then take on the stereotypical roles that they have within their household, and they're still being oppressed. So that's not, they're not empowered within the household level. And then the other question really is, we've been talking about the whole notion of the ecological model, or the theory of systems thinking, and all of that. And I get a sense that sometimes when we do work and we say that there is gender synchronization, so we are working with both men and women, I often feel that there's a missing link in that. For instance, when we state that we are doing work with let's say where we give statistics like Tyrone gave, where you say that there's an absence of fathers, and then we go in there and we're trying to work with fathers, but we have a whole population of mothers who are conditioning boys to become who they are. Men are not in existence on the end. They are socialized to be that way, and they are parented to become that way. So how do we create real linkages when we are working across the levels to say that if I'm going to work with an individual, I'm going to work with a peer structure that affects that individual. To say that if I'm going to work with, let's say, women around contraceptive use, then around that peer structure, I need to work with their partner. So I need to find who their partner is, bring that partner in perhaps a separate space, do work, and then bring them together. Because quite often we say that we're doing work, and it's what do I call it? We're doing work across this level, but it's very disassociated. I bring in men and women, but there's no real connection between the two. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, this is Raju from the International Plan Federation Southeast Regional Office. Thanks, President, for the wonderful deliberation that you had. I would like to echo the same. My first question was on the men-only health clinic. When you talk about integrated services, when you talk about men as promoters and clients as well. So you talk about a compartmentalized service delivery process. So you could say some good practices of how it is really taken forward, and that would be really a good case for the South Asia. The other was thanks, Thomas. Yeah, I mean it was a really good new jargon they talk about third space. I mean it's really good to hear that. I never heard about that. In fact, my only curiosity was you talked about creating a third space. If I would put it right, if I got it right from presentation, maybe by dissociating yourself from the school and workplace we talked about. I don't know. That's still a thing to be debated, because when you talk about there are a lot of in-school issues already happening on men and boys, and out-of-school issues happening. So can we talk about linked platform where you can really link those schools to out of schools and similar situations, rather than dissociating and having a parallel system of service delivery? So some thoughts on that.
One more.
my name's Alexa Hassan. I work with Promundo. I think my question is for Laura and Aaron about your project. Laura, you spoke a little bit about kind of the tensions of kind of getting men involved in sexual reproductive health and rights, and then kind of bringing them into the fold, but the potential threat if the attitude change hasn't been there, and their attitudes exist that could be harmful to women's right to choose. So I guess how do you balance those tensions and moving forward, and kind of the urgency in involving men and boys in this issue, and taking on 50% of the contraceptive use and decision making if that change hasn't come along at the same speed, and making sure that manage the risk and the harm associated with that?
Can we take these 4 and then maybe you can answer, then we can come back to the next round. We still have another 10 minutes. So how do you both divide? Like you take, because 2 questions are for you both.
Well, thank you very much for those questions. So the program coordinator for the Learning Center Initiative can't be here, and she's more intimately involved with the nitty-gritty of what that project was. We're more on the research side behind the scenes. But what I will say with the male-only clinic days, so I think my understanding was that generally within that there was a recognition that there was initial pushback on having men just coming into the clinic at the same time. And so one of the kind of negotiated pieces, we recognize we need to have men coming in, and we want to encourage that, and so let's create only days. But I don't know how often that happened or those details. But we do have a full evaluation of the project, which we can send to you. I can't give too many more details on that, but I would say that was the piece of kind of saying if you feel uncomfortable having men coming in at the same time as women traditional services, if that's something you decide, then maybe a male-only clinic day is a good option. In terms of the male involvement model, I just want to quickly comment on that. I think what's important to remember about the male involvement model in sexual reproductive health is that it's looking at what are the different bits and pieces of men that we need to involve. It doesn't necessarily mean that we don't do that also relationally, but the model is focused on what are the pieces of men as clients, as equal partners, and as agents of change. But I think it's really important that we further that model, and we develop how do we do that with also a model that's explicit on what that looks like relationally, and I think that's really important. In terms of the transformative piece, I'll just quickly comment. I know Erin will be able to speak on some of the findings that she wasn't able to get to in her presentation. I think being transformative around women and their attitudes as well is also critical. I know with our work at Sonke, and I remember having a conversation with Jonah Gakova from Padare in Zimbabwe, another Men Engage partner, where he talks about, and we experience this too, you get men coming in and you've got these trainings and they're really excited about helping their partners out, and they're going to go home and do the dishes, and they go home and they start doing the dishes, and then their wives are like, whoa, are you telling me I'm not good enough? Are you telling me I'm not, no, this is unacceptable. And I do think we have to acknowledge those pieces and be really aware. And I think, abortion is a great example. It's not just men who are anti-choice. There's a broader structure around abortion that means that we're having a conversation around children's rights and needs rather than about women and their right to choose, which I think leads to the question that you asked. And I think it's difficult, but I would say I think we need to start being a little more daring around the kinds of conversations we ask people to have in some of the trainings in the engagement. I think sometimes when you have programs that focus on family planning and on contraceptive use, we're not also talking about unraveling masculinities and looking at what does respecting women's rights really look like. And I think within your own cultural context and using the right people and facilitators, I think we have to start being a little more willing to ask the hard questions to get at the indicators and the outcomes that we need.
Thanks. Just to your point about, thanks for really, centering it, how critical it is to recognize that gender is relational. And if we're going to try to transform norms of masculinity, we absolutely have to look at what are the norms of femininity in these communities, and because they are so intertwined, and especially at the relational level. One thing I did mention is I think it was quite interesting that in the focus group, some of the men and also the women discussed how they weren't always kind of on board with these kinds of changes, and that these, very kind of huge changes that take place in the family level and also at a societal level, how people would perceive them in their communities, was something that women were always on board for. And I mean, it is important that they were included in the evaluation, but I will say, thinking about the lessons we learned from this project, is that I think it was too kind of tokenistic at the end. I wouldn't argue this was a synchronized project. For instance, the survey at the beginning in 2012 didn't also include women. I think it actually should have had both men and women's assessments of SRH knowledge and their gendered attitudes to get an actual broad synchronized approach. They were involved in some of the projects, like the income generating projects, and they were involved in the focus groups of the workshops, working at that level of men as equal partners, but I still would say kind of and on and not a synchronized approach. So I think it's important to use that framework as evaluating these kinds of projects and how we can learn to improve them in the future.
Hi, thanks, Reddy. I'd just like to probably put a little bit more context into the idea of spaces in order to answer your question. I think those of us who are probably more urban and more affluent in our living environments create these third spaces quite naturally, and I think everybody creates third spaces naturally. But the problem that we experience in semi-rural areas and rural areas is that they're not very constructed, and they're not immediately present. And so what happens is that space is constructed by the people that fill it rather than an outside agency, and then can quite easily, if filled with adolescent boys particularly, become negative very quickly. The reason why we disassociate ourselves from school in the Southern African context is quite a practical one most of the time, in that the school environment is often, as I alluded to in the presentation, quite a negative one. Rote learning and dictation, teaching styles basically mean that students switch off quite easily, and punishment for any kind of stepping out of line is quite severe. There's also no comprehensive sexual education in schools, and as we all know, the imperatives of a message usually aren't the most effective way to communicate with adolescents, and particularly adolescent boys. Rules are there to be broken for adolescent boys rather than followed most of the time. And so in constructing the third space that is separate from those methods and that environment, we can use some of the tenets that I spoke about in my presentation, but also come to a more consequential based learning and decision making process. So the Emma Jaha in our projects realize the consequences of an action before they take it, rather than being told not to do something. And that consequential understanding, guided by the mentors, hopefully in our projects has shown more longer lasting and more efficient behaviour change. And so that's the reason why we disassociate ourselves from those two spaces, but also it allows for a very different conversation away from the taboos and the social stereotypes of gender in schools. The last thing I'd like to say very quickly is that because of the school system in Southern Africa, because you can fail a year and because of paid education, you can actually find that you have a class where 20-year-olds are in the same class as 14-year-olds, so very strange age differences in class, which delays maturity and prolongs adolescence of young boys. So you can find a 20-year-old, even a 21-year-old or higher, acting quite below their maturity level expected at that age because they've been treated like that in a class system with mixed ages. I hope that gives you a little bit more clarity. Thanks.
I want to just address, I think James, it was your comment. Part of the reality that we have to deal with, James, in this work is that it is a work in progress. And for many of our countries, it's new work. You know, the idea of now trying to work with men and boys to help them understand certain things that prior to now, it was just accepted that boys would be boys. You know, that expression that can be taken in all kinds of ways. And therefore, boys will be boys and they grew up to be men who are men, who with a lot of destructive and negative perceptions and ideas. And so it is a work in progress. And in some countries, we're actually working against a feminist movement that believes that we want to take over, right? So that there's a certain level of those who were there before feeling threatened. As Kariman, we constantly make the point that we want to work with the feminist movement because they have the best examples of success of how to work in terms of rallying for certain things. But in the Caribbean, we have an expression that is called dotage, which is not, some people when they use it in a derogatory way, it's almost to suggest stupidness, right? But when we use it, it's sort of to say, okay, we're asking you to think differently about something you've always thought a particular way about. And for a lot of men, when we make this suggestion, we say, well, they look at this sort of like if we're dotish, as if we're saying, well, what is wrong with you? If it is working, why would you want to change it? You know? So it is a work in progress. I believe that we have a very long way to go, but the encouraging news for all of us in this work is the fact that a lot of the barriers are being broken, not by hammering on the walls and so on, but because men and boys are really waking up and realizing, wait a minute, there's something not right in how we are operating. So we need to change that. And when organizations like, Men Engage or Promundo or Men Care, whichever is the organization internationally or at the local and regional levels, when these organizations begin to do work, they're going to have to expect a certain amount of pushback, because not everybody wants change. And not everybody wants change too quickly. But we should not be discouraged, because enough people want change that it is happening. We're here, there are 1,100 people here at a conference that is speaking about this issue. They say that when it was 5 years ago, there were 600 people, and maybe if it was 15 years ago, it probably would have been 150 people. So there is progress, and we have to be encouraged by that.
Any more questions? We can have one more. Yeah. Please go ahead.
I'm G from Namibia. Maybe kind of a little bit lost, but maybe I'll get it before Friday. The topic on this session, women empowerment, men engagement, either or, whether we really got to answer it, whether we really got to deal with it. Because Laura, when you're talking about women's rights to abortion, I'm like, where's the or to that? Men's right to vasectomy. Where is that conversation? Why is it that we don't take time to look into this whole thing of men and entitlement? When are we going to say to men that, no, you don't have a right to sex every day? Where are those campaigns? Because we looked at these issues, but we don't confront men and the systems that support men in where they stand and where they are. See, Tyrone, when you say that 54% of single-headed households are women, what is in place where that maybe contributes to these women over time still producing boys that end up being absent fathers? What's behind that? Those are some of the things that we seriously need to take a good look at, and we need to discuss that. I'm looking for a campaign against the Viagra. Because we need to have men that have a desire for more into life and less into sex. Viagra is there for men to have more sex until they are 95. Why? But we don't have a Viagra pill for women and menopause and so on. So that kind of discrimination in terms of systems still continue.
I'm Govinda Dhawan from Nepal. I am working with Care Nepal for Women Empowerment. It's my curiosity, and I am also giving focus to his point. But my query, what is the actual and specific engagement, main engagement? We are not getting the answer. Whatever is done for women empowerment, to empower women, if men have it means created their help, they have cooperated something, whatever they have done there, that is engagement, where they have done this, here they have done this. Where is specific initiative of them? What is the structure of engaging men and boys for women empowerment? What they are doing themselves? How they are changing their attitude and pre-mindset against patriarchy? Please try to make it clear. Thank you.
We can take only one more because we have 3 more minutes. That's it.
Hi everyone, my name is Letitia Alpheus. I'm from Namibia, working for UNFPA. My comment is around the issue of using data, whether it is from program or project experiences or from including research as well. We have men that go through this project and they change at an individual level, which benefits themselves and family as well. However, they feel like the environment is not enabling for them to go out there and actually speak out. We have few of Uncle G in Namibia. You have men and boys that would go home, cook, wash dishes, do laundry, but they do that behind closed curtains. As soon as somebody knocks, they run away and pretend they were doing something else. So we need to sing the same messages on all levels. They need to reinforce each other. At macro level, policies, laws are silent on such issues, and we are more addressing individual and group, peer group, and maybe community level. But I think we need to keep all the levels consistent and do that throughout the process. It takes time, but we need to be conscious of that.
Thank you. Would you like to respond, any one of you, because we have only 2 more minutes to go.
Maybe quick and then
I have a very quick one too.
do it and then I'll.
A very quick response to several of those issues, I think, and something that I want to stress particularly. I think that it's time that the imperatives that we use to try and convince men not to do something, and the bad images of masculinity that we use as deterrents be changed. And I hope I can answer most of your questions with my viewpoint on this into celebrating positive masculinity rather than offering deterrents for negative masculinity. So instead of saying, a bad man drinks, don't drink, we celebrate a man who doesn't abuse alcohol in that way. Instead of saying a bad man treats his wife like this, we celebrate a man who treats his wife in a different way, and hopefully create role models through that process, which might challenge the either-or issue, which I don't particularly agree with as the title to this seminar, and I'm sure most of us don't, in fact, because that's why we're here. But I hope I can give you a bit more clarity there.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I have to say, I'm really glad that other people are frustrated with that as well. I think it's something that I've also struggled with, and sometimes in this space, I was really hoping this morning's plenary was going to speak to some of these systems and policies, and I didn't feel like it did as much as it could. So I'm excited there's other people that are questioning that. I do feel like it makes sense then to sort of offer a plug for the Men Engage Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights Initiative that we're working on, which we've called Passion Works. It's really a response to recognizing that the men as clients, equal partners and agents of change focuses on the individual, and that we have to figure out the systems and the policies and the areas that create gender diversity and other questions. We still have a lot of work to do to make this an initiative that speaks to and Men Engage partners and other partners feel that they can move forward. Yeah. But we do have the 5 posters that we have on the different areas about men. It's Passion Works, Men and the Politics of Contraception, Choice, Speaking Out Against Homophobia, Transphobia. So they're in the photo exhibit area, and I encourage you to, there's post-its, and to put your comments and thoughts on there, and then to follow up with us and tell us how we can make this better so we can address those issues. Thank you again for raising them.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting, interactive discussion which we had. I'm so sorry because we don't have that kind of time to take up everything, but I just want to add one point here, like it's listening to the experiences from different countries. It's not very different in India as well. For example, I just started with these deaths which happened day before, 11 women dying in the camp. So where we are talking about female sterilization as a major thing, not looking at, it's not like what you're saying, Laura, is very important. It's as equal partners, or like what you're saying is a transformative kind of thing, or like which way we are looking and addressing, men's involvement or engagement, whatever we give. I'm sure you will get an answer by tomorrow, like something. We cannot get everything today, but at least some things maybe, it's unraveling now. I think we need to listen to different conversations which are happening in this seminar. But what the colleague friend has pointed out is very interesting. The paradox, like even if we have 64% female-headed households in Caribbean, it doesn't mean that women are exercising control over their own bodies or resources, and then there is no agency. So how do we place that? Does it mean like women are empowered or like men are least empowered, like men are there? I think these are the things which are very, very important when we talk. It's not like, we don't need to see like in parallel women or, creating, at the same time creating the third space. I think these are very, very interesting conversations. We need to entangle, at the same time bring them together. Otherwise we will be like polarizing, okay, men engaged, or women are not empowered, or patriarchy, or no this, like I think we will fall into those boxes. So we need to move out of those, the kind of, the identity kind of thing which are coming into. I think we need to move away. Maybe this symposium will give that kind of opportunity. Once again, my apologies for coming a bit late, but I was stuck with that statement. Thank you all. Thank you so much.